recording and begin our webinar 3, Am I Responsible? And Jason, take it away.
Yeah. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. There anyway. Good to be with you. And for our third installment here concerning moral commitment and the driving question of am I responsible? You know, we just left off with moral judgment and making a judgment about what one should do in a given situation, and now we're going to turn the table a little bit and ask what we should do. What is our own responsibility in carrying out the moral judgments that we make? So with that, let's see. Oh, here we go. My little technology issue. Our objectives will look. We'll go through our the same kind of overview that we've been doing. So we'll start with some objectives, and then do a little bit of review of our last webinar that focused on reasoning and judgment, before turning to today's focus on understanding moral commitment and asking that question of am I responsible, and how we might prioritize the right and prevent rationalizations. The latter being really important here, and we'll spend some time unpacking that. And then we'll talk about the lesson template and activities for helping you develop students' moral commitment in your classroom. And then we'll wind up, as we always do, by looking ahead. All right, so let's get into it. We want to, again, we want to refresh your understanding of the second component of the FCM, moral judgment, and we want to increase your understanding of now the third component, or start to build your understanding and increase it, and how you might use it in your classroom. And as always, we want you to begin to take these ideas and adapt them, and the lesson template in particular, for your own classroom. And we're going to say more about that later, I think. And then finally, we're hoping that these webinars provide a little inspiration and increase your enthusiasm. So let's do some review. What did we talk about last week? Well, we talked about, you know, what's right, and how do people make judgments about what is the right thing to do in a given situation. And we specifically talked about those as products of intuition and reasoning, and we looked at some lenses of moral reasoning that people use to make those judgments. And then we introduced you to this EDMA, an activity protocol that you can use with your students. So with respect to these processes, these key mechanisms for making judgment, we talked about how awareness immediately often just produces an automatic, unconscious, kind of intuitive judgment. We're basically using those intuitive ethics or values and really often feeling something is either right or wrong. What we're trying to cultivate here is not just a feeling and basing our judgments strictly on those initial intuitions, but actually engaging in some reasoning as well, and making sure you know, that we're seeing the situation for all that it is, and not just being maybe led astray by our intuitions, but engaging in some conscious, deliberative thinking about the situation in depth before rendering a final judgment. And so that's what the EDMA was getting us at. Now we talk about reasoning, and reasoning with different lenses as we've framed them here. And we can make judgments, as we talked about, in a very personal way, one that's rooted in our own interest of avoiding pain or maximizing our pleasure, and things can be right or wrong as seen through that, or we can look at situations and make judgments based on whether or not it's consistent with the customs, norms, rules, or laws of our society. Those are the social conventions. Or we can make judgments rooted in moral principles or values, such as you know, fairness and care, or well, here we go. Sorry, slide, and I realized authority, loyalty, sanctity are the other values here that also, though, can sometimes, depending on how they're marshaled, can sort of slip into the social conventional domain. But we looked at, again, on the sides here, this is really a developmental process. Kohlberg's work consistently showed that as students develop and get older, the reasoning initially starts from a personal interest perspective, evolves into a social conventional, and ultimately by the time we're into adolescence, we're able to really use these more abstract moral principles to render judgment. Let's see here. So the way we want to stimulate this stuff, of course, is using real or hypothetical dilemmas, such as the one involving Laura and her friend, and having students ask that question about what one should do in a situation such as this one being Laura here, and more importantly, why they should do that. And so we did a little breakdown here of how the different judgments can be rooted in different types of reasoning. So that really at every level here, a different judgment could be supported. So it's complex in that way, right? Students can use personal interest to justify, cheating or not cheating, as we talked about. Finally, we then introduce you to this EDMA, this ethical decision-making activity, and the many steps involved in that. These first three, these are really the beginning of it, where we want students to engage in thinking about what are the action choices or possible consequences, deciding what action should be taken, and then using reasoning to explain why X should do Y. Okay, well, then we wanted you to transition then to using having a dialogue. Much of the way in which moral reasoning gets advanced is, of course, through exposure to other people's reasoning. And so this is a really important part of this activity, is getting students to work together in their small groups to share what they've thought of, and then to really dissect it together, to analyze it using those ethics, the 5 intuitive ethics and the lenses of moral reasoning, and then finally, to the extent possible, as a group, rendering a consensus decision about what should be done, and then themselves taking the time to reflect back and learn. David and I talked about this afterwards. We think there probably could be an extra step here where this is all happening in small group discussion, but then you might want to have a whole large, before moving to the individual activity, there might be a time where you're sharing out, right? You're allowing groups to sort of talk about what they decided should happen in the reasoning they used. So really, there's room there for a whole group discussion. I wanted to add that here. Thank you. Okay. All right. So let's move on then and move into moral commitment. Today's focus. What that looks like from this graphic perspective is that a student is prioritizing, essentially. They're making a commitment for themselves now. They're moving from that deontic judgment about what one should do, right, that more abstract judgment about what one in general should do, to making the moral commitment. And that involves prioritizing often the right, that is the moral principles over other values or ways of reasoning. And I don't know why that, yeah, over personal values or social down there. Okay. And from our other graphic that we like so much, we can see it from this perspective. And here we really illustrate in the red below moral commitment there, that preventing what, really it's a twofold process here, right? Of wanting to have students prioritize moral goals and values over the non-moral ones, and also prevent the activation of rationalizations. Those are really the two things we're going to talk about here. But here are our big questions. Am I responsible? If I think cheating is morally wrong, am I personally responsible for not doing it? That's a more elaborate version of this central question here. Or in other words, am I obligated not to cheat and act in accord with my own moral judgments? Why or why not? Okay. So as I alluded to, really we're looking at two key mechanisms here. We think to move students from that moral deontic judgment about what one should do to what they should do. and that involves this prioritization of moral values over other values and preventizations. So I'm going to show another graphic that illustrates this. So what do we mean by prioritizing moral values? That is, being fair, being honest, and as more important than getting ahead or going along. That is serving one's own personal interest or just going with the crowd, what seems to be the norm. And then finally, preventing this, this activation of rationalizations. Rationalizations are really the biggest predictor of the gap between judgment and action. People basically disengage a sense of personal responsibility or neutralize it. We're going to explore really in more detail Albert Bandura's theory of moral disengagement. But here I wanted to, we put this graphic back in with these ellipses going up, and from a value perspective, the way I could frame it and condense it and here most succinctly is to say that when one is acting with through the lens of personal interest, it's really about getting ahead. Right? In some certain sense, cheating is just about getting ahead, getting a higher grade than you deserve to basically just advance your own interest. That's essentially the kind of a prime motive and value that's being enacted at that level. Sometimes, in the case of the situation with Laura and helping a friend cheat, or just doing so because everybody else is doing it, it's really about just going along. Not defying what unfortunately has become the norms for peers, which is that many people really don't disapprove of it, and everybody else seems to be doing it. And so from that framework, there's the value, if you will, of just sort of going along, and that can drive judgments and actions. And then finally, though, where we really want students to be operating from is from this valuing of the principle of really doing right, doing the good thing, being just, being fair, and having that having that value of doing the right, driving behavior, and not letting going along or getting ahead trump it. Part of what we're getting at here then is looking at, again, the relationship between these moral judgments and the behavior that people have. And we've seen that moral judgment is necessary but insufficient. So the Socratic or early Kohlbergian model of saying that to know the good is to do the good is essentially the idea that judgment alone would provide motivational force for behavior was not correct, and it was too simplistic. Those judgments matter, and we've seen that students are less likely to cheat when they think something is morally wrong, but it doesn't guarantee that they're gonna not do it. And so there are other things that matter. In today's really focus, we're talking about two of the three things below. The first one is this responsibility judgment, first and foremost. And Kohlberg was, himself with Candy here, theorized that that's what would lead to the action. What you need for motivation there is to move from saying, oh, it's wrong for one to do in general, to saying it's wrong for me to do. And that's what we're trying to cultivate here, is that move from a sense that it's wrong in general to it's wrong for me. And that is what Kohlberg would call a responsibility judgment. Some would call it, moral obligation is another term that gets used here, is that I'm obligated. And our own research, in a paper yet published, shows that this is a significant mediator of the relationship between judgment and action. That is to say that judgments, when you think that cheating is morally wrong in general, and you have the judgment that you're responsible for doing it, that really significantly strengthens the relationship between judgment and action. It's known as a mediation effect. We're not going to focus so much on the moral self here, but that's another component that helps motivate students. So the extent to which they see themselves as moral agents, and the extent to which morality is central to who they feel who they are as individuals. That's a bigger project, trying to change perceptions of moral self, but also something that that can mediate the relation between judgment and action. The third and final one that we are going to focus on is moral disengagement, because this happens to be pretty much the strongest and most robust predictor of the disengagement between judgment and action, the disconnect, the gap that we've talked about. And so that's when you essentially do the opposite of what you've done above with the responsibility judgment, is you're now neutralizing that responsibility, you're disengaging that responsibility. And that's what I want to talk about right now, because it is so important. And part of what we're hoping happens in this lesson and what you're teaching your students is you're going to teach them this theory in essence. And we're hoping in doing so, in making them aware that these strategies exist. These are things that, that human beings use to justify misbehavior often. And so Albert Bandura is the main theorist, and he talks about them as mechanisms of moral disengagement, and there are really several of them, and there's broader categories and so forth. I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list here, but really the ones that matter most with respect to cheating behavior based on research. And the first and foremost would be externalizing blame. So even if a student, that is to say, they think cheating is wrong to do, they think even that they're, generally speaking, responsible for not cheating, they still might do it. And these are the kinds of rationalizations they would use, the displacement of responsibility. So well, under externalizing blame, that's sort of a broad mechanism. There's a more specific mechanism of displacement versus diffusion. And these are the most common. The displacement is saying that my behavior is not, yeah, I cheated even though I think it's wrong, but it's not my fault. It was a bad teacher, or or I did it for a friend, or I did it for my parents, or something. That somebody else or the situation is responsible for their behavior, not them. Diffusion is similar. You're getting rid of that personal responsibility, but in this case, you're diffusing it into the culture or the environment. Saying that that's just the way things go around here, right? That's everybody does it, and that's just the way it is. Who am I to behave any differently? And so it's not any one individual that's responsible for your behavior. It's the whole culture of things. This gets used a lot in corporate scandals. Many of you remember the scandals of the 90s with Enron and so forth, and really exposed the kind of culture of cheating and fraud that existed in these organizations, and no individual feels responsible. It's just something, the way things are done. The second big set of mechanisms are concerned minimizing the wrong. So euphemistic labeling is one way in which we do that. We use different language. Instead of calling it cheating, we are copying off another. We just, we're taking a quick peek. Or instead of, altering, fabricating data, oh, we just fudged a few numbers or a fax. There's all kinds of language that we use to basically sanitize the wrong that we've done, to minimize it. And another way to do that is to do what's called a palliative comparison, or sort of making a favorable comparison for you. So, in this sense, cheating is, it's not like, you killed somebody or did something really horrific, and that minimizes, of course, the wrong in the eyes. And all this, I should note, this moral disengagement stuff. You might ask the broader question of why we even do this. This is basically, from a Freudian sense, these are known as ego defense mechanisms, right? The reason why we rationalize things is to basically, justify to ourselves that we're really not bad people. We don't want to feel bad when we do things that we know are wrong. And might have hurt other people or have been unfair to them, and so we don't want to feel bad about ourselves and feel guilty. So we use these ego defense mechanisms, as Freud would call them, or disengagement strategies, to neutralize the act, right? And to externalize the blame, minimize the wrong, or deny the crime altogether. That's a more extreme sort of form of moral disengagement, where we just say that, I didn't even do it. You just go into a complete state of denial, it didn't happen. Or you deny the victim. In this case, and this is more common, with cheating in particular, where many students would say that, well, my cheating doesn't hurt anybody else, so it's a victimless crime and therefore justified. Or rationalized. The final one that really applies most specifically to cheating is moral justification. And this is one we've definitely seen in our research, where about 20 to 30% of students say that, that one of the reasons why they cheat, or a common reason why they cheat, is because they think that something was unfair, that the test itself was unfair, or the instruction was inadequate, and they were somehow justified for doing so. Some also, appeal to a sort of a higher sort of purpose or a goal, and this cheating might be bad, but I really need the grades to get into college, and that's a lot more important. Or I'm doing it for my parents because they would be disappointed and hurt, and so I justify doing it to avoid their disappointment or and upset. These are, as I say, the really popular ones, or the most common ones, are the externalizing of blame and the minimizing. But the moral justification and the denials do come in as well. I've listed two more here because they're really important for particularly bullying behavior and really much more serious, moral problems of aggression and hostility. Bandura himself wrote a lot about war and Nazis and the treatment of the Jews under the Nazis, and so very much more weighty subjects. And so if you're interested, you should definitely check out some of his work. But so he talks also about hostile attribution bias and dehumanization, which is a way of rationalizing aggression. And then I bring in a quote there from Voltaire that I really like, and I think is sadly, certainly speaks to the world today, sometimes in the geopolitical world anyway, and the atrocities that get committed through people dehumanizing others. So those two are probably not going to come into play when we're talking about academic dishonesty. All right, so with our understanding that we want students to prioritize the value of doing right as opposed to just going along or getting ahead, and we want them to prevent the engagement of these rationalizations or the disengagement of the responsibility. How do we do that? Well, this is actually one of our more straightforward and simple activity protocols. I have to admit, we're still we're still agonizing over the details of it, and even calling it the values identification, because we haven't talked about just values per se. We've been using the word intuitive ethics and moral principles, but we kind of mean that they're meant to be synonymous here. The idea is, again, with this whole process, is getting students to decide for themselves what they should do or would do in a given situation, to make sure that they're not using rationalization, so deciding and checking, and then confirming that the values and goals that they have prioritized, and understanding the ones maybe that they let go. Sometimes when making moral decisions, it means there's compromise, right? We have to prioritize one set of goods or values over another, and in doing so, those others sometimes take a hit or get lost, have to get let go of. So I say it's more simplistic in the sense that it's only 3 steps, right? It's instead of a 9-step model, but and it's meant to be more or less an individual activity. But certainly could do, groups could be sharing and talking about these steps. You'll see that in the larger protocol. I don't have it in this PowerPoint. Okay, let me stop here for a second here, make sure where we're at. So yes, so the 3 steps. You'll see in the final document there's other activities that will help support that, and including the the disengagements and so forth. I probably should have cut and pasted those in here, but I didn't. You'll get those in the learning template. We had some additional activities too, though, that we wanted to bring in. Or I hope this one's not going to necessarily be additional, but if we think about the deciding, checking, and confirming, there really is almost a fourth one that we included in the protocol that's not here because we've been editing this thing. And that is really asking the students themselves to make a commitment. Now, this could be optional, I think, but these pledges have really been shown to be effective, not only in correlational studies, but even recently in a study down at Harvard, where Harvard undergraduates, or the Harvard researchers rather, had students sign a pledge specific to that course or an assignment, saying that they, would not or did not, receive any unpermitted help or unauthorized help, and that really seems to matter. So it could be appropriate, in this process to ask students if they'd be willing to make such a pledge. And here we provide some examples of ones that have been used elsewhere, either a general pledge or a specific assignment or project pledge.
And before we go on, we have to give a tip of the hat to one of our participant teams here, right in the middle, West Haven High.
Yeah, there they are. Yeah, Mark and his group represented here. And this, again, this really proves quite effective to do. Another additional activity would include having students work together to talk about, create a top 10 list, maybe their own top 10 list of reasons why they think it would be wrong to cheat, and then you could compare it to the one that David. I don't know, where did you get this one, David? I don't make any. Did you create this, or where did we get this from? Because we don't make any attribution for it.
You and I created this list, but it's obviously a compilation of just a lot of different suggestions, and we were capturing these from schools we were working with as well. So
right,
I
think that's right. From the survey data when we had the fill in the blank stuff. So we had so this list anyway. We've had it for a while, I think, or been building it for a while. But so they could create their own list, but then compare it to our list. And really it's in two parts. This one here looks at the individual ways in which cheating might undermine the individual, which most students concede, if cheating hurts anybody, it's just the self. So this just articulates 4 reasons that we've synthesized here, but we also want to be clear with them of how it affects society, because this is the part that really makes it the moral issue, and in the sense of being unfair. And we want and unfair to others and involving others, and so having them, it'd be interesting to see what they came up, your students would come up with versus the list of 6 reasons here. Okay, so those are the main activities there. This VIPA, and then these supplemental activities we just talked about. And of course, the template itself it follows the same pattern as the other ones, with the 4 broad sections. In this case, of course, you'll be using webinar 3 in the VIPA as the primary supporting materials, and the goals here are to hopefully strengthen students' commitment to act in accord with their moral judgments about what one should do or not do in a given situation. So we want students. The objectives here is to they'll be using the their EDMA, because you've already selected a case, or you guys are using a real hypothetical dilemma, and you're carrying it, the same case, or even maybe a couple of cases through. And at this point, students will then engage in identifying rationalizations that one might use to disengage. We want to raise awareness that these are out there and name them. That the idea of this is it's called deliberative psychological education, right? Where you give people a language and words for understanding some psychological processes, in this case, rationalizations. And so we think by raising awareness, hopefully they'll be less likely to, and being able to refute them, they'll less likely to fall subject to them unconsciously, which is often how it works. Moral disengagement happens at an often a subconscious level. And so by really exposing these rationalizations, these mechanisms, we're really hoping to reduce their use, as it were. And then, of course, the second objective of really prioritizing that ethical value of doing right. Again, the doing right, that's the broad term for it, but we're talking about being fair, being trustful, honest, respectful, whatever the ethical value is there, but prioritizing that over the personal or the conventional ones of getting ahead or going along. Yeah, and again, we're always using an inquiry-based approach here. We're asking, even if students are thinking about it themselves and having it's small group dialogues, pairs, however you want to do it, but engaging students in this question about their own responsibility. And so we hope the completion of the VIPA will get at that. And again, we do need you to provide, as with every lesson, we want to expose students to these theories proper. So using this PowerPoint then, and then some slides from it anyway, to introduce students to Bandura's mechanisms of moral disengagement, and how they expose them for what they are, which is really self-serving rationalizations, to do something that they really know that they shouldn't be doing. And then providing the examples of the commitment statements, and maybe having students hopefully make their own. So assessment activities here would include your basic checks for understanding and formal stuff, especially when you're introducing the new ideas around Bandura, or making sure they get this distinction between the different value frames of getting ahead, going along versus doing right. And then formal assessment. We haven't really talked a lot about any formal assessment activities, but and I don't think included any in this protocol per se. We're going to have ultimately a general assessment at the beginning and the end for students, but you yourself, just having them complete and submit the VIPA, might fit here. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to end there. I apologize if I feel a little less sharp this morning. I have been up for a couple hours since about 3:30 this morning here, and not feeling my clearest. But so maybe there's more questions, comments, or suggestions. Well,
I'm going to go ahead. Jason, I thought it was very clear, and so I'm going to open up the mics here, and hopefully we won't get feedback issues. But as I go down, does anyone have a question? We can ask everybody individually. Adair, how are you feeling? What's your sense about this moral commitment lesson? And is Mark there?
Really?
I guess we were having some mic issues there. Bob Johnson, how about you?
Well, I think it's very interesting. I think maybe we should probably find a couple of more case studies, though, maybe that the students can look at and try to evaluate those too. That would be my only suggestion. But all the backing information is really good.
And
yeah, I think that's really key, actually, to stay there for a moment. Sorry.
You're cutting out.
We have the cases that we've created with Laura, John, whatever. You may want to have your students. Your students could create their own too. And talk about what's real for them. And what's going to be real for you in your classroom. So if you're a science teacher or a history teacher, you want to use a case and an example that that really fits for your curriculum and carry that through. But I definitely support that notion there, right? That you got to really choose your case material carefully so that it's rich and applicable for your situation.
Yep. Great.
Thanks, Mark, for pointing out your mic's not working. I see it in the chat box here. And Bob, you also recognize that in I think it's lesson 1, we provided a series of different cases.
Right. No, I saw those. Yeah,
Okay.
I was just saying. I mean, in general, I like the way we're going about examining and having students give the feedback and doing the group work and maybe coming up with their own top 10 list on why not to cheat. I think that's a great objective.
That's a terrific activity, and to have them even prioritize. They could be prioritizing within that list. So that's all part of that reasoning process we're trying to encourage. Good observation.
Yeah. The template. So this, the rationalizations, right? So whatever your case is there, this is how we're creating some space to have them really do that. I think that is, that's the, really critical part, as I said, is that because so many students do rationalize cheating, and the extent that we can really expose these rationalizations.
Students, please report to the front of the building at this time.
Sounds like Jay's microphone's open over there.
You got it.
So Jason is pointing out the template that you'll be receiving, and that will be linked to our blog. I'll also give you the links to this template directly to Dropbox. And some of you have asked just for me to forward them to you personally, and I can do that as well. We're really hoping that our blog will satisfy an ability to exchange information. So if that's not working for you yet, I hope you could email me later and let me know.
Yeah. So here's what this VIPA currently looks like. So basically, you're just continuing that they completed, and they had the final judgment of what should be done. They just reiterate that here at the top. And then we ask them to decide for themselves. They fit a decision right against rationalization. So we ask them to, and this could be done in groups. This could be done, like in a small group activity really, and having them do that together. I would say decide on their own though. Small group, and we'll annotate this before we post it. And then part of the prioritizing. The values or goals that are being prioritized and those letting go. Say much about that when we went over it, but as I said a little bit, that'd be right. I'm choosing to be fair and honest. I realize that, I am letting go of that. Maybe I'm going to take a personal hit, especially if I think that everybody else is cheating, or most everybody else, or my friends, other people are getting ahead, and I know they are. Maybe not everybody's doing it, but I'm going to have to let go of the that kind of, getting ahead or success at any price sort of thing. And with respect to Laura, in her dilemma, I think that really illustrates the tension between moral values of, Laura knows that it would be wrong to help her friend cheat because it'd be unfair to everybody else who wouldn't be getting that help. And hopefully we hope that, Laura chooses not to do it. But that's going to come at the cost of the loyalty, perhaps, to her friend. Her friend's going to see that as Laura not being a good a dutiful friend, and that's likely to have consequences. And I think for in the adolescent brain and world, I think that's the real tension, to be honest with you, is the one listed second here. In a lot of situations, especially if it involves any kind of social cheating, and not telling, and certainly not telling on friends. It's that tension between fairness, what's good for the whole and for everybody, versus what I owe to sort of my friends or my peers.
Yeah, it's a loyalty component.
Yeah, so there's a real tension there. I mean, that prioritizing of the values is, it's not a hard thing that has to get cut or hurt, or compromised. I think as Isaiah Berlin said, I can't remember how he put it exactly, but it was something to the effect, that for every moral decision, there involves some kind of irreparable loss. In prioritizing one thing, you have to let go of another. that's space for. And we've been sort of tentative with that. I don't think we can force a student to make a commitment statement, but I think the idea was to at least provide a space and an opportunity for them to make a pledge of their own if they would like. So I'm more in favor of keeping that optional rather than coercing it. I think it'd be more powerful if they make it, but it's and if they don't, then they don't. But I think that we can create the space and the opportunity for it for them to make a pledge if they like. And again, it would be more or less respect to that specific kind of behavior, right? If that's why we want to choose a dilemma or a scenario that's really rich and applicable to your course. So they're going to move from saying that it's wrong for X to do it, it's wrong for me to do it, and then really making that commitment. I hope that helps a little bit anyway.
Jason, just one observation that as you move, particularly in the Word document, your audio breaks up a little bit. So
okay.
If we could move back, could you show us the PowerPoint one and then go to that last slide?
Yep. Right here?
Yep. So, and I don't mean to totally cut off comment today. We can still have questions, but I just wanted to point this out before our end time. And we recognize that multiple districts were on leave this past week. But as you're able to get your lessons, we're asking for you to email them to me, and then I'm asking for this follow-up either in person at your school or with a GoToMeeting session if you have audio and video link. I'd like to make some eye contact during this meeting. We could do it with Skype. I don't need to show a document during our meeting time, so we could use GoToMeeting or Skype, or I'll come back to your school. That's fine. But I'd like to do that before our next session on Monday, May 6th. So I'm asking your teams to sit down and collaborate and pick a time. The only days I'm asking you to avoid would be Tuesdays. And then it's just going to be a first come, first serve thing, right? So we might have conflicts even between the teams. But let me have some dates, and I'll confirm with you. And then pointing out that our next webinar is on Monday, May 6th. Same time, same channel, and we'll send you an invitation for that. And again, looking forward to our continued work together. So we've got a couple minutes left. Are there any other questions that anyone would want to put on the table before we sign off? And I'm watching the chat box here now because I recognize West Haven was saying they had audio issues. Elizabeth, you said you had audio issues. So if you put anything in the chat box for a question, I can pick that up too.
Well, do remember that we're, with respect to the lesson templates, we're not expecting you to, to radically change anything. It's just a more matter of adding your details and any kind of, variations that you think, that might be appropriate. And we realize too that this is only tentative. That this is subject to change. These are just drafts. And we just want to get you thinking about it. So maybe you're really, you're seeing, you're not really, doing much by way of editing at all. You're just, it's minor. So don't think that, this task it has to be, too involved. We really do just want you thinking about, quite specifically, what classroom you're going to use it in, and how you would, make it work for your students.
Well, I think for me, it's Bob Johnson here. I think for me, I would, in the midst of preparing my AP students now to take their AP tests May 6th, as a matter of fact, and I think after the AP, this is a great activity to work with them on some of these. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Good. We are hoping, ultimately, right, that that you'll be using these and delivering them some point very early on in the semester of next, of next year, sort of officially, right? So,
right.
So that way they're getting it at the beginning of
right.
the year,
right?
But it'd be great for you're thinking about probably doing some practice with them, right? And
sure.
Be appropriate. Yeah, terrific.
Yeah, and then a lot of them are seniors, and they're going to be sitting in college classes next year, and they should get a sense as to what, going in to higher learning, what it means to have some kind of moral centers in terms of their tests and their writing.
Excellent.
Mark and Elizabeth are pointing out the same thing in the chat box, that they'd want to practice with their AP students after the exam, and that makes sense. But again, we're targeting, for the real applications of this pilot will be done next fall. We're just preparing now. Well, everyone, thank you so much.
Actually, Dave, before we end their ideas, I think practicing with your with the AP students is great because they're probably really able to have probably the richest conversation with some of this heavier stuff with the ethical values. So that'll be a good area to good group of students to work with, I think. Go ahead, David. Sorry.
Well, I want to thank you, Jason, and I thought you did a terrific job today, and thank everyone for participating, and for those who will be looking at this recording later on. Again, keeping in mind my goal to hear from you shortly about a potential meeting date with your team. But thanks to all, and please stay in touch with email with questions, and look forward to our next session on May 6th and my meeting with you in between those dates. Jason, thanks again. Excellent job, and everyone have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.